Good evening, my peeps. Very good evening to you. This evening, I want to talk to you about the myth of reverse racism and why affirmative action and DEI are not the problem in this edition of the Deep Dive. Over the past few decades, a dangerous and misleading narrative has gained traction. The idea that affirmative action and diversity, equity, and inclusion (DEI) initiatives are somehow forms of reverse racism, discriminating against white people in favor of minority. This is absurd. It's laughable. This argument is not just historically ignorant. It is calculated. It is a calculated attempt to erase the brutal legacy of systemic oppression that has defined America's treatment of Black people and other marginalized communities for centuries. To call affirmative action or DEI racist is to fundamentally misunderstand what racism is, or to pretend to misunderstand what racism actually is. Racism is not just prejudice. It is prejudice plus power. It is the systemic, institutionalized disenfranchisement of a group based on race. For hundreds of years, America's legal, economic, and social structures were explicitly designed to disadvantage Black Americans and other minorities. Slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, voter suppression, segregation, mass incarceration. These weren't unfortunate mistakes. They were deliberate policies meant to uphold white supremacy. Yet when policies are introduced to correct these injustices, suddenly people cry racism. The irony is astounding. Affirmative action was never about exclusion. And the people who are making the noise and creating the pretense, they know it. They absolutely know it. Affirmative action exists because for most of this country's history, Black people, Latinos, indigenous people, and other marginalized groups were actively barred from educational and economic opportunities. Universities, corporate America, and government institutions were never level playing fields. They were monopolized by white Americans through exclusionary laws and practices that persisted well after the civil rights movement. Affirmative action simply acknowledges that centuries of racial injustices don't disappear overnight. It doesn't give unqualified people a free pass. It ensures that qualified candidates from historically excluded backgrounds have a fighting chance against a system that was never built for them in the first place. The Supreme Court's gutting of affirmative action in college admissions was celebrated by conservatives as a victory against racial preference. Look who is talking about racial preferences. But in reality, it was a victory for the status quo. The same status quo that has kept elite institutions disproportionately white and wealthy for generations. If you look at the Supreme Court, you ain't got to wonder why they upheld that. DEI is a response to systemic racism. It's not a cause of it. Diversity, equity, and inclusion programs are another target of right-wing outrage. The argument goes against that DEI programs discriminate against white people by prioritizing diversity in hiring and leadership. This is such a crock of shit. This conveniently ignores the fact that for centuries, white men were the only people being considered for these roles. That wasn't called discrimination then. It was called doing business as usual. DEI is not about exclusion. It is about correction. It ensures that workplaces reflect the diversity of the world in which we live, rather than remaining gated communities for the privileged few. The backlash against DEI is not about fairness. It's about maintaining power. It's about maintaining power structures that have long benefited a select group at the expense of everyone else. The real racism systemic oppression and requires efforts to fix it. The notion that affirmative action and DEI are racist policies is a gaslighting tactic. It flips the reality of racial oppression on its head. The real racism in America isn't giving a black student or Latina executive a fair shot. It's the centuries of disenfranchisement that made these policies necessary in the first place. Everybody knows that, including those who opened their trap to complain about reverse racism. If you truly want to talk about racial injustice, let's talk about racial injustice. The racial wealth gap where the median white family holds 10 times the wealth of the median black family. Want to talk about racism? Want to talk about DEI? The fact that black Americans are incarcerated at 5 times the rate of white Americans, despite similar crime rates. The persistent underfunding of schools in predominantly black and brown communities. The voter suppression laws that continue to disproportionately target minorities. Yet when policies are introduced to address these inequities, these inequalities, the response is to scream reverse racism. Who are they fooling? Do they take us for fools? That's not an argument. It's an excuse to oppose systemic oppression under the guise of fairness. The bottom line is equity is not discrimination. Affirmative action and DEI programs do not take anything away from anyone. They ensure that opportunity is not reserved for the privileged white few. The people who oppose these policies are not fighting for fairness. They're fighting to maintain an equal system that has benefited them and them alone for generations. Calling affirmative action and DEI racist is not just wrong. It is an insult to the millions who have been systemically excluded, marginalized, and oppressed in this country. The real question is not why these programs exist. The real question is, why do some people fear a more just and equal society? These people who are complaining about DEI and affirmative action and preferences, they are the beneficiaries of all kinds of DEI and exclusionary programs since the beginning of this country, through legacy admissions in colleges and universities, legacy admissions in job opportunities in the business world, legacy appointments to public sector work in this public sector workplace. These are the people. These are the people who are the descendants of the people who did not want black people to swim in public swimming pools, even though they pay their taxes. And so they dumped up the pools. Yeah, they poured concrete in the public swimming pools that they were enjoying. They didn't want black people to enjoy the same pools, even though black people pay the same amount of damn taxes as they did. So what did? They drained the pools and poured concrete into them and dumped them. Are these people redeemable? What do they take us for? They take us for fools. They take us for fools. When they run this crock of shit that DEI and affirmative action is reverse racism, who do they think they're fooling? Do they think that we're stupid? We are not our grandparents. We're not even our parents. So this needs to stop. We know what you're doing, and you have the numbers to do it. So go ahead, do it. Cancel everything you want to cancel. But I tell you what, the universe operates on principles. This is the deep dive. Thank you.